everyone, RogueGold here, welcome back to the Division 2. At the time I'm sitting down to record this video, it has been about a week and a half since the Battle for Brooklyn DLC launched, time flies, and since then I've seen plenty of takes and discussions about the release online. Some people love it, some people hated it, some say it saved the Division 2, others say it has killed their interest in the franchise, just another day on the internet I suppose. But in this video there are a few different metrics and angles I want to use in order to analyze and discuss what kind of impact the DLC has actually had on the game so far, and then using that, talk about what it means for the future of the game. So I'm excited to get into this. As we do, I wanted to shout out very quickly that I've just launched a brand new merch store. Currently there's like a core collection of RogueGold apparel on there, shirts, hoodies, hats, and more, you name it. So if you want to check out the stuff, support me by getting an item or two. You can check it out at RogueGold.store. I'll also have a link down at the top of the description. Thanks so much if you do choose to check it out. And then additionally, as we jump in, huge shout out and thank you to our channel members. Your ongoing support allows me to do what I do on here and is greatly appreciated. But with all of that down, let's get into this. Alright, so coming into this, there are a few different ways that people may interpret the title of this video and the overall question of did the DLC succeed? From a purely revenue standpoint, at this time we have no idea. On the one hand, it's pretty hard to calculate what the budget for content like this may have been. It's probably a more accurate question to ask how much does it cost to keep a development team of this size employed for the amount of time that it took for them to develop the DLC, and obviously we don't really know that information. But in terms of revenue, the soonest that we may get an actual tangible idea is Ubisoft's next investors report, if the numbers and reception is deemed worthy enough to mention it in that call. That is slated for next month, as of right now, in July. If and when we do hear anything there, I'll certainly do a follow-up video. I'm curious to see what they might say. But beyond just that one side of it, there are other indicators of overall success for a release like this. And one of the big reasons that I actually wanted to make a video like this is that I kind of had a realization in the past 2 weeks or so since this all started happening. It's honestly probably something I should have seen coming, but when you look at it, the DLC itself didn't actually matter all that much. Now, I know that sounds like a crazy statement. Let me clarify. It of course does matter. The team that built this thing put a ton of hard work and love into it. I think that shows in the final product. But what I mean is, when you take a step back and you look at the much grander scope of what is happening with the game right now, there is very much a plan in place here that has begun to unwrap itself, and it's clear to me that more than anything, the release of the DLC was widely used as an engine to make that plan happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let us start with Battle for Brooklyn itself. I think the DLC itself has been received mostly as expected. There were those who took the devs' words at face value when they told us multiple times while this was in development that it would be smaller than Warlords of New York. And for many of those people, they just wanted more Division. That's what they got. They're mostly pleased. On the other hand, there are those who, despite the devs saying this would be smaller than Warlords, there were those who held out hopes for getting a new Dark Zone and additional game mode, some kind of other revolutionary new systems and features, even though Warlords itself didn't come with those things. But yeah, that crowd, from what I've seen, is a bit underwhelmed by what we got with Battle for Brooklyn. Again though, how exactly that translates sales-wise with people, waiting for reviews, watching gameplay before deciding if they want to buy it, we'll have to wait and see. But largely those seem to be the two camps of reception that I've seen. Where I really want to take this video though is to look at the impact of the DLC's release overall. And what I mean by that is, as soon as I got wind about the fact that the game would be launching on Xbox Game Pass the same day that the DLC released, that's when I kind of went, oh, I see what's happening here. Because here's the fact, even though players have begged for more Warlords of New York style content since 2020, the development team at the size that we have right now knew that they did not have the resources to pull something like that off, at least not without taking 3.5 or more years to make it. At the same time though, for whatever reason, games like The Division 2 and others in its genre, they get the largest amounts of exposure and attention from these kind of large paid content releases. And I'm telling you, even if there was a world where Battle for Brooklyn, as we got it, 2 weeks ago, if that released as free content instead of a paid DLC, I guarantee you that it would not have gotten quite the same degree of interest and exposure. Why that is, I have no idea. I think there's just a general connotation out there that free content is not quite to the par of paid premium content. I'm sure stuff like market trends also plays a role in that, but I can almost guarantee that behind the scenes when the devs were planning all of this, they said, well, we can try servicing players' requests for more Warlord-style content by making a DLC, but also, this may be one of our last opportunities in the Division 2's lifecycle to get the kind of exposure that a large paid package of content like this can bring. And therefore, in these last 2 weeks since the DLC released, we've seen them pull out pretty much all of the stops. Of course, there was the release on Xbox Game Pass, as I mentioned. If you didn't hear, there was also a $3 sale of the base game on Steam, maybe a couple of other platforms, but much like how they did that back in 2019 or 2020, back when Warlords was spinning up. There's also them launching that whole dedicated shepherding event in-game to help out new players. It came with huge, lucrative rewards for veterans. Even if you look at this from a marketing perspective, when is the last time you heard of Ubisoft paying creators to do sponsored Division 2 content? Crickets? Yeah, it's probably been since Warlords that happened, but around the Battle for Brooklyn launch, you had the likes of Force Gaming doing a video, good friend of the channel Buzz Lightyear, who many of you know he drifted away from doing Division content, but he was sponsored by Ubi to come back and talk about the DLC. You had some people who are better known in like the first-person shooter space, like Westy and others, doing streaming for the DLC. And so all of these components, the marketing, Game Pass, sales, it wasn't all for nothing. It was in an attempt to maximize exposure and fully capitalize on that said exposure that again only seems to come from these paid content releases. The question though, of course, is did it pay off? Well, from a player count perspective, we of course cannot see all platforms. We do have Steam charts that we can use. I'll remind everybody though, as I try and do every time that we look at these, Steam charts for the Division 2 need to be taken with a grain of salt. The game only released on Steam 4 years after it launched. It came out in 2019, but released on Steam in 2023. So the majority of the PC audience is on Ubisoft Connect. But over that first weekend after the DLC dropped, player counts peaked right around matching the highest ever peak from when the game released on Steam, again, which was in 2023. Maybe even more impressively though is that solid numbers have held on Steam since then. Across this past week during like regular daytime playing hours, numbers normally held well above 10,000 people. Looking at another metric, I can see an impact on my end too, as a creator. For those who didn't see, I did a new and returning player guide for the game back in early November, I think it was, for when Seasons 2.0 launched. And if you look at the view chart for that video, there's a pretty much steady line in growth on that, except for right at the end, there's a very large spike as of recently, and you guessed it, that started on May 28th, the release date of the DLC. And wouldn't you know it, one of the recent comments on there was from somebody shouting out their attendance on the video from Game Pass that had like 20-something upvotes. Similarly, I did a Is the Division 2 Worth It in 2025 style of video in the recent weeks. I've gotten multiple comments on there inquiring about that $3 sale that was going on specifically. And even outside of my sphere, there's been a good amount of online attention coming from the release of the DLC. Jez Corden, who is a pretty prominent and well-known gaming pundit and correspondent, he shared an article that somebody wrote on Windows Central saying, "The Division 2 Battle for Brooklyn DLC is the best $15 I've spent in some time." And so very much by all measures that we can see, the Division 2 currently has the most amount of people engaged and playing since 2020 when Warlords of New York released and some of the bigger updates after that like the Iron Horse Raid. Basically since all of the last big content of the old era of the game released. In this new Division 2 era, which started in 2022 in Season 9, this is the most amount of people that we've ever had engaged in the game. And the DLC release was the thing that made that happen. If that was the only goal, to get players in the door, then I think you have to say that the DLC has been a success. Yes. But that does beg the question, can it hold? Now I already know, I've seen the comments myself of people saying, well great, if they can just do a DLC release like this once or twice a year, then we'll be set until we get the Division 3. I regret to inform you, that is just not going to happen. From what we know, with the team that they have assembled, Battle for Brooklyn took a bit over 2 years to make. I assume that process might quicken up a bit if they were to do it again, now that they have the experience of doing one under their belt, but in that time, since they started working on this, content quantity that we were getting in the live Division 2 game plummeted. The last big content release that we got from the team who made the DLC was the Descent game mode in the middle of 2023. We did get the Paradise Lost Incursion after that, but that was made by a separate team at Ubisoft. And so, frankly, it would not shock me if Battle for Brooklyn is the final DLC or major content release for the Division 2, as by the time you were to make another, we could very well be beginning to approach the Division 3 release territory. And so, if this is really it for this kind of content, then it's a valid question to ask what keeps people in the game until then. That is very much the $1 million question. I did videos in the recent months saying that that is what really is going to matter, is what what the devs do after Brooklyn's launch. Because look, in many ways, the game is arguably in the best state that it has ever been right now, in terms of the amount of quality of life features that we have, in terms of the amount of systems and progression and items. The amount of content for a brand new player is staggering. The only part of the game that might be exempt from this claim is PvP. That's kind of another story though. Maybe I'll have to do a video on that soon. But in games like these, content is king, and eventually you will need new stuff to continue keeping people interested. So look, will we lose some of the player surge that we have right now? Absolutely. How much, however, depends on what the plan is going to be moving forward. The devs have outlined some rough goals for Year 7. They're working on a new open world feature. There's progression and economy revamps in the works. They said they want to push out more frequent updates and seasons. But very notably, they're holding things closer to the chest this time than they have in years past. And so really, we'll just have to wait and see what exactly those plans are, and if it is truly enough to try and maintain this momentum that the DLC release has earned The Division 2. Well, my friends, that is just about all I have for you in this one. I very much hope you enjoyed this analysis and deep dive on the state of the game. Truly, it has been a really fun last few weeks seeing everybody engaged, seeing all these people coming back and playing. As I said a moment ago, naturally that is going to subside. That's normal. But I am genuinely curious to see how many people will stick around depending on what happens moving forward. So, that said, I would now love to hear all of your guys' thoughts on this topic. What has been your impression and reaction to not only the DLC itself, but the impact it's had on the game? Have you seen clanmates return? Do you think people are actually engaged and playing? Let me know what you're thinking. I'd be very curious to hear. That's all I've got though. If you enjoyed the video and you want to see more from me on The Division 2 moving forward, then I hope you'll consider clicking that subscribe button. Until the next one though, thank you all so much for watching. RogueGold.